Hey everybody, welcome back. In the last episode at the Red Barn, it was working on the suspension stuff for the 914 Ferrari, and in this episode, I want to get back to working on the shift cables. Oh boy, they're here. These are the shift cables from our friends at Control Cables. And if I know how to work a tape measure, and there's every possibility I don't, we'll have some shift cables in the car here in just a second. Okay, so we have shifter cables in the car, and they're wildly out of adjustment, so yeah, a bunch of work to do still. So one of the things was the other factory cables, or they told me they were rejects because they had too much slop inside the actual cable housing, and maybe that's why I'm struggling with what I'm struggling with. How I did this before was I left that component on there, and I was able to just, get the cable up to it and spin the entire cable. But this one doesn't want to do that. So I have a feeling I got to pry that thing off, put it on there, which is kind of a drag because it was really nice to be able to just, spin the cable to adjust it. But such is life. The other thing I know for sure is these don't fit quite right, these control cable components, and we knew that from earlier. But what it looks like is, for whatever reason, again, my measuring, is the cable housing, the actual cable housing could be a little longer and it might make it a little nicer, but I think I have enough adjustment. The other thing that's the real sort of, not major issue, but this clutch hydraulic junction, the clutch line comes in down here. The Ferrari cable was much smaller in this area, and in fact this bolt does not want to, it's not going into position. You can see it's out of alignment. So I may have to remake these hydraulic lines, or when we redo this threaded end piece, maybe there's a way. You can see there's probably enough room. I don't know, we'll see. Maybe we shave this nut down, and so it can slide all the way farther forward. Don't know, have to work that out. But these are the fun parts of custom fab jobs. But you saw the one that was hooked up, the side to side motion, seems to work fine. It's again not adjusted, the clips aren't all the way down, but even the cable, the shifter itself isn't bolted down, so it's not going to do it. But if I just kind of hold it, you can see, that cable seems to work fine. It feels fine. So I think we're good. I'll have to chase this down and mess with it and try to get everything adjusted and hook that other cable up, and then we'll have shifter. How awesome is that? So I was hoping it would go together a little simpler than that, but as I mentioned, such is life. Anyway, shift cables, and away we go. All right, playing around with this a little bit now, I think I'm starting to understand that the difference is, because these cables, the actual cable housing length can be adjusted, that affects where everything goes relative to the inner cable moving. So it was a game of, I still haven't hooked up the fore aft, the fore aft shift, and it's running into itself down here, so pay no attention to that. But what I was able to do was get the side to side working correctly. So it still needs to be a little bit more fine tuning, but when you get over it, I want to go into the reverse gate, it's down and back into the reverse gate, and I get the right travel here. And then I've got enough travel to get it over into the 5th and 6th gate as well. So, like I say, I'm still trying to figure this out. And at first, it looks like if this thing's in neutral, and I think it's in neutral, you can see if I can get the shifter to stay there. Well, I kind of can't, but you can see how much overlap there is in that one. So that rod, that shifter cable is too long. And here you can see I've already backed this out a fair distance to try to get the cable housing to take up some of that slack. And if I come back here, I think that's the issue. It looks like this clip, by the way, the Ferrari, the Ferrari cables don't even have this nut. So I have a feeling that once this clip is adjusted, once I modify the cable ends, that I can just lose this nut because it'll be locked down at the front, so the cable can't turn. So I think I can eliminate this problem by just, shortening this piece, getting rid of the lock nut, and we'll be good to go. So really now the question is, can I get the right adjustment out of this cable? And if not, then I only need to buy one more. So, live and learn, like I said. But we're getting there. Well, as they say, there's some good news and some bad news. And the good news is I'm learning lots about shifter cables and how you measure for them. And I guess the bad news is I'm having to learn a lot about shifter cables and how you measure for them because these aren't going to work. They are too short, and I'm starting to understand why. Here's one of the big problems. You can see that in order to make these work, because they're not long enough, at least the housing's not long enough, I have to try to get as much housing length as I can, and that forces this threaded component, it forces it so far back that it starts to interfere with this part of the trans. And you may recall from earlier that I had test fit that, and it worked. It looked like it might have been a little tight, but that was because I made the assumption about how long the cable was going to be. And so what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to make a technical drawing, and that's going to be using a piece of something that can approximate the bendableness of these cables. And I will get a dimension from the mounting surface, gently routed. Oh, because the other thing is the one cable is so tight, you're not going to be able to see it. But when everything was hooked up, the side-to-side cable was so tight up against the engine, it's not long enough. And it might have been the way I measured it. Must have been the way I measured it because, I took a foot off of the Ferrari cables and those worked, but these are different cables. So I think what has to happen is I have to make an exact drawing of the length, the actual length between the fixed point on the shift block and the fixed point on that bracket. And then I have to come up with, like, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give them, the dimension to that bracket, for instance. Then I'm going to give them the quote-unquote neutral, relaxed position of how far this end needs to move, right? And how far forward it's going to go, and how far back it has to go. And that's going to determine the travel here. And then I'm going to also give them the measurements of how far the shifter moves. And we started playing with that yesterday and marking off distances of, how far actually this part of the mechanism is forcing the cable to travel. And one of the things that's interesting is Ferrari uses 4-inch shifter cables, 4-inch travel cables, and the side-to-side action in that thing uses up about 1 5/8 inches of cable travel, and the 4-aft shift uses just barely over 2 inches. So I spec the cable based on what the Ferrari cable did, not on the function that it needed to perform. And since it's translating from a Ferrari factory cable to an aftermarket cable, I think all this stuff starts to conspire against me, and it's going to mean a do-over on the cables. Not that I like spending money on do-overs, but these are not so expensive that it's causing me a huge amount of pain. I'd rather not have to do it, but it's not like they were $1,500, a piece, like the Ferrari probably would have been. So in any case, I'm going to get back under there, pull these cables out, get some measurements, do some analysis, and then send that to the cable company. And they, it sounds like they're going to be fine using that information versus their generic model, their generic measuring model. And we should get there from here. So again, another one of the 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But let's end on good news. I'm learning a lot about shifter cables. Shifter cables version 2. I have to admit, I'm getting tired of this version N+1 stuff. I'd really like to just make progress rather than continue all this learning. Here's kind of one of the big challenges is with these aftermarket cables. You can see that because of this part of the cable, it's really tight down here. I got this piece, this hydraulic junction, honestly put in place. Now the good news is it doesn't look like this is the issue, right? And if it is, you can't see it, but down in there are 2 fittings. So if I had to make new lines and move this to somewhere else, I don't know, this convenient location up here, I probably could. But what's got to happen now is you can see that this big old piece of the cable, this is the aftermarket cable from Control Cables, that has to be moved as far into this bracket as it possibly can get because of how tight everything is right here. So what I think I'm going to do is remove, like, it's hard to see because the thing's in there, but you all know what that end piece looks like. It's about, I don't know, is it 3/4 of an inch long? I can cut down a bunch of it because it's going to clip in at the front. And if I cut down a bunch of it, I'll be able to thread this piece farther into it, and that'll pull the cable housing forward. So this is a critical measurement and a critical sort of, it's got to be able to fit. And I'll have to explain that to the Control Cable folks. But now, I don't know if you noticed, but here's my latest, greatest idea. I just got some Romex, and I'm routing it nice and relaxed. I don't know if you can see it. It's nice and relaxed, going up through the firewall, and it's going to come into the shift block, and I'm trying to give myself plenty of slack and all that good stuff, and then I'll measure that as my cable housing distance, and then do a technical drawing, and then walk through it with them and make sure I understand exactly what information I need to provide them, or if they have any questions, I can explain everything that I'm trying to get done. And fingers crossed, version 2 will work out. So I think I'm going to call that done for this episode. I'm going to work up that technical drawing, get it to our friends at Control Cables, and fingers crossed, next episode, we'll have some shifter cables in the 914 Ferrari, and we'll be done with all this learning, and we'll actually make some real progress. So, as always, thanks for watching. Thanks for questions and comments, and y'all take care. We'll talk to you again real soon. Bye-bye.